I've seen a lot of things in my life. War, dust, fame, silence. But I never thought I'd see something that would bring me to my knees when I woke up the next morning. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a saint. I'm just a man who's lived long enough to know that life can surprise you even when you think you've seen it all. That night wasn't special by any means. It was just another quiet night in my house. The kind of silence that follows you when you're old enough to have outlived your noise. I remember reading my Bible before bed, not because I was trying to be holy, but because I was looking for something peace, maybe. The kind that doesn't come from money or applause. I must have drifted off somewhere between Psalms and John, and that's when it happened. In that strange space between sleep and awareness, I found myself standing in a light that didn't hurt my eyes. It wasn't blinding, but it had weight. It felt alive. And then I saw him. I can't explain how I knew it was Jesus. I just did. You don't mistake that kind of presence. It wasn't fear that hit me first, it was recognition. Like every cell in my body suddenly remembered something I'd forgotten a long time ago. He didn't look like the paintings, not like the pale man with soft hands I grew up seeing in Sunday school. He looked timeless, strong. There was the kind of strength in him that didn't need to prove itself. His eyes, though they were the kind that saw everything and still loved you anyway. I didn't say anything at first. What do you say to the Son of God when he's standing in front of you? He spoke first. His voice was calm, but it carried through me like thunder under still water. He said, Clint, you've seen much of the world, but you've only seen it from one side of the window. I didn't understand. So he kept going. He said, you've walked through a land divided by skin, stories, and fear. But I didn't create color to divide you. I created it to teach you love in shades. That hit me. Right there in that moment, I felt something inside me collapse. Because I realized I'd lived long enough to see how the world tries to draw lines around people, and I'd played my part too, sometimes by silence, sometimes by ignorance. Then he said something that shook me to the core. You've seen black men and women in your country rise from chains to stages, from fields to fame, but still, the world doesn't see them the way I do. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't expect that. He looked straight into me. Not at me, into me. When I walk this earth, he said, I chose the broken places to reveal heaven, the poor, the rejected, the ones nobody wanted to touch. And if I were walking among you today, you'd find me in the faces of the ones still fighting to be seen. I could feel my heart pounding, like my body was trying to make sense of a truth it had ignored. It continued. Black people carry a rhythm of heaven in their suffering and their strength. They've been bruised by history, but their spirit never broke. That's not human will alone, that's divine fire. I remember wanting to look away, but I couldn't. He wasn't scolding me. He wasn't angry. He was showing me something sacred. He said, you've watched them sing through pain, forgive through injustice, build through ashes. They have carried the world's sins on their backs and still found joy in the morning. Tell me, Clint, do you not see my fingerprints in that? That was the moment my eyes started to sting, because I had seen it. I'd seen men and women who had every reason to be bitter but chose faith instead. I'd seen beauty rise from places the world ignored. He went on, the color of a man's skin is not a mark of difference, it's a brushstroke of purpose. And when you despise the painting, you insult the artist. It felt like my chest cracked open. I had never thought of it that way. He stepped closer, not in distance, but in presence, and said, the world keeps asking, why did I make them this way? But I asked the world, why did you forget what I made? He paused. And in that pause, I felt every injustice, every hurt, every unspoken apology echo inside me. I whispered, Lord, what do you want me to do? He said, speak. Not as a man trying to sound holy, but as one who's seen truth. Tell them what I showed you, that there is no color in my love, that the scars they carry are not curses, but crowns. And then he looked at me with that endless calm and said one last thing before fading. Clint, I didn't make one race better than another, but I have seen a people who've turned pain into prayer and struggle into song. I am in that melody. Listen to it, and you'll find me there. When I woke up, my pillow was wet. I don't remember crying in the dream, but maybe my soul did. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the dark. I felt like a man who'd been shown the truth about a painting he'd been looking at his whole life, but only now realized what it meant. That morning, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't pick up my phone. I made coffee, sat by the window, and whispered a prayer I hadn't said since I was a kid. Lord, make me see. And for the first time in a long time, I did. The morning after that dream, I sat in silence for hours. The sunlight coming through my window felt different, almost sacred. I could hear the world outside, the hum of cars, the whisper of the wind, but it all sounded softer, slower, like the earth was listening too. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night, not because I was afraid of being called crazy, I've lived too long to care about that, but because I didn't have the words. How do you explain something that's not meant to be explained? I kept hearing his words echoing inside me. They have carried the world's sins on their backs and still found joy in the morning. That line stayed with me like a heartbeat. I started remembering faces, men and women I'd worked with, people I'd met on sets, in towns, on dusty roads. I remembered their stories, how some had been told they weren't good enough, how others had to fight twice as hard just to be seen. And yet they laughed, they prayed, they loved. I thought about the musicians I used to listen to, the soul, the blues, the gospel, how every note felt like it was born out of pain, but carried by hope. And for the first time, I understood what Jesus meant when he said there's a rhythm of heaven in that. It's not just music, it's a heartbeat that refuses to die. You see, I grew up in a time when people were separated by more than distance. There were lines you didn't cross, words you didn't say, and truths you didn't question. And even though the years went by and the world changed its clothes, those lines never really disappeared. They just hid behind polite smiles and political talk. That morning, I realized I'd lived my whole life watching the world like a movie, seeing people move, speak, suffer, but never stepping into the frame to feel what they felt. Jesus didn't come to me to scold me. He came to wake me up. So I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I started listening. When I went out, I watched people not with judgment, but with curiosity. I'd see a young black kid walking to work before dawn, headphones in, determination on his face, and I'd think that's strength. I'd see an older black woman standing at the bus stop, her hands tired but her eyes peaceful, and I'd think, that's grace. And I began to see something deeper, a quiet power in a people who've carried history on their backs and still find reasons to smile. It wasn't pity, I felt it was awe. There's a kind of dignity that comes from surviving pain and refusing to let it define you. That's what I started seeing everywhere. I remember one day I was at a diner not far from my place. A young waitress came up to take my order. She was maybe in her 20s, African American, with this calm energy about her. She called me sir, smiled, and asked if I wanted my coffee black. I looked at her, and for a moment I felt something stir inside me. I thought of the dream. I thought of Jesus saying, when you despise the painting, you insult the artist. And I realized this world has spent too long arguing about colors instead of admiring the art. When she walked away, I whispered, thank you, Lord. I see it now. I don't think that dream was just about race. It was about blindness. All of us walk around half asleep, seeing people through the fog of what we've been taught. But Jesus wasn't talking about race as much as he was talking about vision. He wanted me to see the divine fingerprints on every human being. And he used black people as an example because they've carried a heavy story, one written in pain, resistance, and redemption. The world has taken from them, misunderstood them, and yet they still sing. That's what shocked me most in the dream, not his words, but what they revealed about the endurance of the human spirit. You can't fake that kind of faith. You can't fabricate that kind of love. It's something only forged in fire, and he made me see it. The next Sunday, I went to a small church on the other side of town. Didn't tell anyone who I was. Just walked in, sat in the back, and listened. It was a black congregation, full of music and joy, the kind of worship that feels like a storm and sunlight at the same time. When they sang, the whole building shook. Every clap, every shout, every note, it wasn't performance, it was power. They were talking to God like they knew him personally. I remember sitting there, eyes closed, feeling something break loose inside me. Not guilt, just humility. I realized that I'd spent decades looking at faith like a Sunday routine, but what I saw that day was life itself. And I thought of his words again, they have turned pain into prayer and struggle into song. He was right. When the service ended, an older man came up to me. He didn't seem to recognize me, and I liked that. He shook my hand and said, brother, I'm glad you came. God's been waiting for you. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about that line, God's been waiting for you. Maybe he'd been waiting for me to stop just being aware of injustice and start being awake to love. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the stars, and I thought about every person who's been judged for how they look instead of who they are. I thought about all the pain hidden behind strong smiles, and I made myself a promise that for whatever time I have left on this earth, I'll use my voice not to divide, but to remind. Remind people that no skin color holds a monopoly on God's love. That maybe, just maybe, the people we've overlooked are the ones carrying heaven's light the whole time. You see, the shock of that dream wasn't that Jesus loved black people. The shock was realizing how much of his heart they already reflect, and how blind the rest of us have been not to see it. That's what changed me. Not religion, not guilt, but revelation. And ever since that night, I've never looked at a face the same way again. After that Sunday, something in me wouldn't sit still. I'd wake up before dawn and sit by the window, coffee in hand, watching the first hint of sunlight touch the sky. I'd remember that dream, his words, his eyes, the calm that carried truth like fire, and I knew it wasn't given to me to keep quiet about. But speaking about something sacred is a hard thing to do, especially when the world's grown used to noise. I wrestled with it for weeks. How do you tell people you saw Jesus in a dream and that he talked about love, unity, and the value of a people too often misunderstood without them thinking you've lost your mind? I wasn't worried about reputation. I was worried about meaning, because truth can't be sold like a movie script. It has to be lived, breathed, carried. So I started small, conversations, moments. Whenever someone around me said something careless about another race, or made a joke that had poison hiding behind laughter, I'd stop them gently, not angrily. I'd say, you ever think maybe we don't know as much about people as we think we do? Sometimes they'd laugh, sometimes they'd go quiet. But I could see in their eyes a small crack forming in the wall. That's how change begins. Not with a hammer, but with a whisper. The more I spoke, the more I realized people weren't cruel by nature. They were blind by habit. They'd grown up being told a story about who was less and who was more. And that story had been repeated so long it started to sound like truth. But the truth I'd been shown, the one that tore me open in that dream, was simple. God doesn't make mistakes, and he doesn't repeat colors by accident. Each shade of skin is a letter in a larger sentence he's writing about humanity. And when we ignore one, the whole sentence loses meaning. I remember being invited to a small film event months after that dream. They asked me to give a short talk, something about storytelling and legacy. But as I stood there looking out at the audience, all I could think about was what Jesus told me. Tell them what I showed you. So I did. I told them about the dream, not as a revelation, not as a sermon, just as an experience that woke me up. I told them how I'd realized that black people in particular carried something deeply spiritual in the way they endure, forgive, and rise. I told them that every culture has its strength, but that we often miss seeing God in others because we're too busy guarding our own comfort. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Afterward, a young man came up to me. He was African American, maybe 30, clean-cut, soft-spoken. He said, "Mr. Eastwood, I never thought I'd hear someone like you say something like that." And then he smiled and said, "Thank you for seeing us." That hit me harder than I expected, because that's all anyone really wants to be seen, to be known beyond stereotype, beyond history, beyond skin. A week later, I got letters, some kind, some not. One said, "You're ruining your legacy talking about race and religion." Another said, "About time someone with your voice said what needed saying." I read them all, then folded them away, because this wasn't about approval. It was about obedience to truth. You see, people think change comes from politics or protest, and maybe it does, in part. But the kind of change that lasts starts in the human heart. And that's what Jesus showed me. He didn't give me a campaign, he gave me compassion. That's a harder thing to carry, because it demands you keep your heart soft in a world that keeps trying to harden it. One night, I was at home flipping through channels and saw a news story, another headline about racial tension, anger, division. It felt like we hadn't moved an inch in decades. And for a second, I felt hopeless. Then that quiet voice in my spirit said, "Clint, the world doesn't change because you shout louder. It changes when you love deeper." So I turned off the TV and started writing. Not a movie, not a script, just words, letters to myself, reminders to stay awake to the truth. I wrote, "See people, not categories. Speak life, not labels. Remember, the same breath that made you made them." Those words became my compass. A few months later, I was at another event. A reporter asked me, "Clint, why talk about race now, after all these years?" I looked at him and said, "Because silence is comfort, and comfort is the enemy of compassion." He didn't have much to say after that, but that's okay. I wasn't talking for applause. I was talking because I didn't want to die with truth still sitting in my chest. The dream didn't make me religious. It made me real. It stripped away all the noise and left me with one truth, that the measure of a man isn't in what he's achieved, but in how much he's learned to see God in others. When I look back now, I realize the message Jesus gave me wasn't just about black people. It was about the miracle of endurance, the holiness and resilience, the sacred beauty in those who keep loving a world that's hurt them. And that message doesn't belong to one color, it belongs to all of us. Still, he used them as his example for a reason. Because through centuries of struggle, they kept singing. And maybe in that melody, the rest of us are supposed to find our own redemption. That's what I tell people now when they ask me what I believe. I say, I believe in God's art, and we're all his colors. Some folks nod, some don't understand. That's fine. Because revelation isn't meant to be argued, it's meant to be lived. So I live it quietly. When I meet someone, I look them in the eye and try to see what he saw in me, not my mistakes, not my skin, not my pride, but my soul. And I remember his last words in that dream, tell him what I showed you. I think that's what I'm doing right now. There's a kind of silence that comes at the end of life that's different from any other. It's not the silence of emptiness, it's the silence of understanding. I've felt that more in recent years. The noise of the world has faded, and what's left are a few truths that I can finally hear without interruption. That dream that night, it didn't make me a preacher, and it didn't turn me into a saint. It made me a man who finally stopped pretending he understood everything. It made me see how blind I'd been to the beauty right in front of me. I think about that a lot when I look back at my career, my choices, my country. I've told stories about courage, justice, right and wrong. But the older I get, the more I realize the greatest story is the one you live inside yourself. And the plot of that story always comes down to one question. Did you learn to love? That dream was Jesus' way of answering that question for me. He wasn't giving me new information. He was reminding me of what's always been true, that every person is sacred, that every color of skin, every culture, every struggle carries a reflection of the same divine image. That we don't have to understand people to love them, we just have to recognize that they belong to the same Creator. Sometimes, late at night, I go back to that moment in my mind. The light, the calm, his eyes, and I hear him saying again, the color of a man's skin is a brushstroke of purpose. I've spent years trying to live like I believe that. That's not always easy. The world still argues, still divides, still forgets. But maybe the point isn't to fix the whole world. Maybe it's just to keep your corner of it honest. When I talk to younger people now, actors, writers, kids just trying to make sense of this crazy world, I tell them, don't waste your life defending walls you didn't build. Spend it opening doors you never walked through. Because if there's one thing I learned from that dream, it's this. The moment you start seeing others through the eyes of God, you can't hate them anymore. You can't even look down on them, you just want to understand them. And maybe that's what heaven looks like, not clouds and harps, but a place where no one's afraid to be seen for who they are. I used to think legacy was about the movies you make, the awards, the lines people remember. But now I know it's about the hearts you touch, the truth you tell, and the love you leave behind. It's about whether, when your time comes, someone can say, he saw me. I want that said of me, not that I was famous or tough or legendary, just that I saw people. Because that's what Jesus did in that dream. He saw me, flaws and all, and still called me to see others with the same grace. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, maybe this message is for you too. Maybe the next time you meet someone who doesn't look like you, doesn't talk like you, doesn't live like you, you'll stop long enough to see the light in them. Because it's there, it's in all of us. And if you ever doubt that, remember this. The same God who shaped the stars also shaped every shade of skin, every tone of voice, every rhythm of life. He didn't make mistakes. He made masterpieces. So when I say that what Jesus told me about black people changed me, it's not because he singled anyone out, it's because he showed me how deeply he's in all of us and how brightly he shines through those who've carried pain with faith and turned wounds into wisdom. That's the message I'll carry to my last breath. That's the truth I want echoing after I'm gone. Not a sermon, not a story, just one old man's confession that he finally learned to see. And if that's the last thing I ever teach the world, that love has no color and heaven recognizes every face, then I guess I've said enough.